For the topic of individual choice, there's a couple of concepts we want to look at. The first is an indifference curve. Indifference curves are based on the idea of utility. Indifference curves show all the different possible combinations that produce the same level of utility. So a useful way to think about indifference curves are to think about how happy something would make you. As our motivating example, we can think about having slices of pizza, and we can have many different amounts of pizza, and we can think about apples, and we can think about many different amounts of apples. We have two different indifference curves here. The first one, this lower indifference curve, notice the notation I'm using is U naught with a bar over it. So a bar over variable can mean a couple of different things. In this context, that means that we're holding that variable constant. So we're holding constant utility on this curve. That's pretty much what the definition is, right? We've got the same or constant utility. And there's many different points along this curve, and all the different points represent different amounts of pizza, different amounts of apple. All those different points have something in common. They all produce the same level of happiness for you. So we can think about two different points, point A and point B. Point A has a certain amount of slices of pizza and a certain amount of apples with it. Point B has less pizza but more apples. And so you could think about going from point A to point B, right? You're having some pizza taken away from you, which generally would make you less happy, and so you've got to be compensated with more apples to raise your happiness back up. How many apples? I don't know, but we hit a certain amount of apples, and you're back to your original level of happiness. If we did that for all the different possible combinations that produce the same level of happiness, all those points would make up this curve, and we would call that curve an indifference curve. We had two indifference curves there. We had U bar naught and U bar 1. What's the difference? They represent different levels of happiness. So along this curve, all the different points represent the same level of happiness, but we can think about two different points here, point A and point B. Notice point A and point B have the same amount of pizza, but point A has less apples than point B. If you had the same amount of pizza, but you had more apples, we're going to assume that that's going to make you happier. One of the fundamental assumptions underlying our story about individual choice is that more is better. That the more you have of something, the happier you are, the higher your utility. So again, the more apples you have, the happier you are. Same amount of pizza, different amount of happiness, and so they must be on two different indifference curves. Again, all the different points along this curve represent the same level of happiness, and all those points are going to make you happier than all the points on this original, or this first indifference curve. But again, all the points along that initial indifference curve produce the same level of happiness. Indifference curves and budget constraints. Budget constraints show all the different possible combinations that you could purchase with a given amount of money. So to work through a really simple example, we can think about if you had $12 in your pocket and you could buy two things in the world, slices of pizza and apples. And pizza costs $4 a slice and apples cost $2 an apple. How much could you buy? Well, actually, you could spend your money in a couple of different ways, right? We've got four different lines here that all represent different amounts of consumption that still spend the full $12 in your pocket. You could buy no apples, and that means you could buy 3 slices of pizza. Or, if you only wanted to buy 2 slices of pizza, let's see, 2 slices of pizza at $4 a pop would take up $8, so you'd have $4 left. Sounds like with that $4, with apples at $2 a pop, you could buy 2 apples. Or you could buy 1 slice of pizza and 4 apples, or no pizza whatsoever and 6 apples. All those represent different ways that you could spend all of your $12 of income. If we took this idea and we put it back into that graph similar to what we used with the indifference curves, we were measuring pizza vertically and apples horizontally, right? This line right here is a line that describes these 4 points here. That vertical intercept up here represents 3 slices of pizza and no apples. That would cost $12. My horizontal intercept over here represents 6 apples and no slices of pizza, which again would spend $12. And actually, if I took any different point along this line, what it's going to do for me, or what it's going to show me, is a different combination of pizza and apples that still spends the $12. And so when we talked about indifference curves, we said that we had two different indifference curves, and it sounded like the rule that we had was that indifference curves that are further from the origin represent a higher level of happiness. Can you think about what these two different budget constraints represent? The budget constraint that's further from the origin represents something specific.